Colin's phone lit up while he was standing next to the dining table. I only caught half a sentence on the screen. You really are the man of the year. He flipped the phone face down right away, so fast the spoon in my hand gave a tiny shake. I'm just talking, he said. His voice was steady, not a hint of anything off. He spoke like I had just asked him a question. I hadn't. I only looked at the little icon that flashed before the screen went dark, a lock next to the words, hidden messages, a group chat he'd never mentioned. I didn't react, didn't frown, didn't ask. I just sat there with my hands on the table, listening to the kitchen clock tick one beat at a time. It wasn't until he walked out of the room that the next part of that half-seen message clicked into place in my head, like my eyes had recorded it and were waiting for my brain to wake up. Handling everything for your whole family and still staying that patient? I really respect you. I sat up straight. Handling everything for the whole family. The phrase was so strange I had to repeat it to myself. Not just wrong. It was a different version of the life I was living with him. But all I did was let out a quiet breath through my nose. That familiar feeling again. The kind of silence you learn when you've trained yourself to watch first, before believing any explanation. I set my spoon down, then I rewound. To understand this moment, I had to go back to when everything still felt normal. My name is Moraine. I'm not loud, and I don't like stretching out things that could be handled with one sentence. And I stay quiet when silence gives me information. And with Colin, silence was usually the only way to see what he really thought. Colin stepped into my life like someone who always knew what to say and when to say it. In front of others, he kept a polished kind of politeness. No slips, no awkward edges. He knew how to make people feel like he was listening to them. I used to think that was sensitivity. Later, I learned it was more like a skill for building an image. But at that time, everything still felt fine. Fine in the sense that there were no storms, no tension, just a few small cracks I assumed everyone had in a marriage. Take this, for example. Whenever his family called, Colin would glance at me before answering. Not to bring me into the conversation, but to check if I was about to say anything. If I opened my mouth, sometimes he'd rest his hand on my shoulder so lightly that anyone else would think it was affectionate. But I knew it wasn't. It was his way of saying, let me talk. There were times I told a story in front of his sister, and Colin would correct me. That's not what she meant. Let me explain. His tone was always even, and his smile held the same fixed shape, as if correcting me was something he did daily and I should be used to it. I used to think it was just his perfectionism. He didn't want people to misunderstand. He wanted things to look tidy. I shrugged it off because, honestly, I don't like arguing. I never felt the need to win over something small like a story about what I did over the weekend. But over time, those small things started showing up more often. He wanted control over how I told a story. Feck, he worried someone would get the wrong idea. He fixed every detail I said, like my words could cause real damage. One night, he said, "Don't talk too much. People can misunderstand you." I looked at him. Misunderstand what? He hesitated for half a second, then smiled. I mean, you say things that aren't necessary. I didn't respond. I just noted it. Some small sentences leave a long echo. And then there was the time his sister praised him. Colin is so thoughtful. He handles everything in the house on his own. I was standing behind her, listening, not knowing who she was talking about. Colin glanced at me for exactly 1 second. Quick, like someone hit by a flash of light. Then he smiled. It's nothing. It's what anyone would do. I remember not being angry. Just one thought rising. What has he been telling them? But I didn't ask. Not because I was afraid of the answer, but because I wanted to watch a little longer. The gap between his two versions was starting to show. One version, when it was just the two of us at home. And another version, He performed when someone else was around. I still thought it was just something small. Until tonight, when his phone lit up with that line, "You really are the man of the year." At that point, it wasn't small anymore. It had become a story other people believed, a story that didn't include me, or if it did, it was a version of me I didn't recognize at all. I stood up and put my bowl in the sink. My hands didn't shake. I didn't feel betrayed the way people usually describe it. I just felt cold. The kind of cold you get when you step out of the shadow of something you hadn't dared to look at directly. Why did he need to play the perfect man so badly? And why, to do that, did he need a distorted version of me? The answer wasn't in this kitchen. It was in those locked messages. From that night on, I started looking at Colin differently. Not with suspicion, but with the kind of quiet someone has when they've noticed a crack and want to see how far it spreads. I didn't say anything about the message. I just watched. The first thing I noticed was that Colin got tense whenever his family called on video. Not the irritated kind of tense, but the kind actors have backstage, waiting to step into the spotlight. When I sat beside him, his voice was short and clipped, just enough to keep the conversation going. But the moment I stood up to get a drink, stepping out of the frame, he changed instantly, brighter, more animated, like I'd just moved a barrier out of the way between him and the version of himself he wanted to show. I didn't interfere. I poured my water and stood far enough away for him to think I couldn't hear anything. I let him be free in whatever version he was trying to perform. What struck me was how fast the switch happened. It took less than a second for him to shift his whole energy. People don't do that unless they have something to hide. Another evening, his sister came over. I told a story about a time Colin and I went shopping for the apartment. Just a small thing. We couldn't agree on what we liked, and we ended up choosing the simplest option. And I was midway through explaining how we'd gone back and forth when Colin cut me off. "That's not what she meant. Let me explain." He said it without looking at me. He just turned to his sister and continued in that calm voice. "It was really just a small misunderstanding. I thought that one looked better, so I picked it." His sister nodded and smiled, noticing nothing. And I just swallowed the feeling that someone had taken my hand and turned it in a different direction. I didn't have to say anything, but I knew exactly what was happening. He didn't want me telling the story the way I remembered it. He wanted the version where he was always composed, and that version only existed if he was the one telling it. After that, anytime I brought up something about the house, he repeated the same line, "Don't share those things. You're not great at explaining." He said it gently, like a kind reminder, but each time it cut into me a little. Not deep, but sharp enough that, repeated often enough, it became a thin, clean slice. One day, he left his phone on the sofa. A notification popped up from that same group chat. I couldn't open it because it was locked, but the preview alone was enough to stop me in my tracks. "No idea how you put up with your wife's personality." I froze for one full breath. My wife's personality. I tried to remember what I had ever done to become the kind of story that made people admire him, but there was nothing. Not a single moment matched what they were talking about, which only meant one thing. Colin had told them something I didn't know. I set his phone back exactly where it was. I didn't search. I didn't touch anything else. I didn't need to unlock it to understand the nature of the praise he kept getting. People don't call someone patient, long-suffering, or carrying everything on his own, unless they've been told one specific kind of story. The story where the husband is the hero and the wife is the burden. I didn't feel the soft kind of hurt. No sadness, no urge to defend myself. One thought surfaced, clean and sharp. He's living with me, but out there he's living as someone else. And in that version, there's no room for me. Or if there is, it's a version of me that looks nothing like who I am. Once I saw that clearly, the small details started to show up like ink spreading on paper. The day his family called on video, I happened to hear him say, "No, she forgot again. I'm used to it." His voice was soft, lowered just enough to make the words sound like reassurance. The person on the other end laughed sympathetically. I stood in the kitchen doorway. I knew I hadn't forgotten anything that day, but I didn't step in. I wanted to hear what he said when he thought I wasn't part of the story. Another time, I heard him tell a friend that lately he'd been handling everything on his own. His friend laughed and said Colin was the kind of decent man you barely find anymore. I was sitting 2 rooms away, not close enough to catch every word, but close enough to understand the structure of the story. Colin was the one carrying the load. I was the one not present in the carrying. These things started showing up more often, bit by bit. Nothing big enough for me to stop him, but enough for me to know it wasn't accidental. And the peak was on a weekend night, while I was rearranging the kitchen shelves. Colin had just finished a video call. I didn't think much of it until I saw him walk past the phone on the table, his finger moving fast, not locking the screen, deleting. I watched the call history disappear line by line. I didn't say anything. I just leaned against the counter, my hands resting lightly on the cold stone. No one deletes video call history without a reason, and his family wasn't the kind of people he needed to hide from unless he'd said things he couldn't risk me seeing by accident. When he walked back and saw me there, he asked, "What are you doing?" Just felt like standing for a bit. He nodded, not suspicious at all. He didn't know what I'd just seen. And in that moment, it became clear. He wasn't just building a story about himself. He was building an entire parallel life, where I was the backdrop that made his patience and kindness look brighter. By this point, I wasn't angry. I didn't confront him. I just recognized one simple, cold truth. No one keeps 2 completely different versions of themselves without cracks showing. And Colin, no matter how hard he tried, couldn't hide them forever. It happened on a morning that seemed completely ordinary. Colin left his phone on the kitchen table when he stepped out back to grab something. The screen lit up just as I walked by. This time it wasn't just a preview. A full notification dropped down, and the screen didn't lock again the way it always did. Maybe he was in a hurry, or maybe he thought I'd stopped paying attention. And I saw the group name Family Thread, his family's group chat. Under it were a few lines of conversation, not long, just long enough for me to understand the entire story he'd been building. Last night I had to handle everything by myself again. My wife's mood has been all over the place lately, but I'm used to it. Guess I'm the one who has to take care of the whole house. The lines were neat, clear, not vague at all. I didn't need to read more. That was enough. I stood there for a moment. I didn't touch the phone. I didn't scroll. I didn't do anything that would let him realize I'd seen it. I just let my eyes memorize every word. The first feeling wasn't hurt. It wasn't anger either. It was clarity. The kind you feel when a painting you thought was abstract suddenly reveals it was made of deliberate, straight lines all along. Here, the intention was clear. Colin wasn't having an affair. What he was hiding wasn't another woman. It was a version of himself that was too perfect, and to make that version shine, he needed a villain. Me. The family gathering happened a few days later. His mother's house was small, warm, always smelling like baked bread. I used to love that place, but that day, the space felt fragile, like it would crack if someone touched it too hard. Colin sat in the living room, talking with a relaxed ease I rarely saw when it was just the 2 of us. He took a sip of water and said to his mom and sister, "Last week I asked Moraine to help you move some boxes, but she said she was busy, so I did everything myself." The sentence dropped into the room as lightly as nothing, but I heard every word. And so clearly it felt like he was talking about another woman entirely. I stood a few steps away. What chilled me wasn't what Colin said, it was the natural look on his face, as if he believed that story was true. I remembered that week perfectly. He was the one who said, "Just stay home. Too many people will only make things messy." I didn't want to argue, so I nodded. I never thought that nod would become the foundation for the story he told today. If I stayed quiet, his story would take root. It would become the truth in the minds of the people he wanted to impress. I walked closer, steady. My voice wasn't louder than usual, not colder than usual, just a straight line. "That didn't happen. You were the one who told me to stay home." The room froze for one full second. A silence not of embarrassment, but of air stretched thin, waiting for someone to breathe so it wouldn't break. Colin turned to me. His eyes flickered fast like a startled reflex. For the first time, I saw him lose his rhythm. He tried to smile, but the smile never reached his eyes. His sister looked at Colin, then at me. Her expression was like someone who had just read two different versions of the same story and didn't know which one to believe. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to prove anything. The truth was already standing in the middle of the room, clear enough that no one could erase it. Colin stumbled through an explanation. "I must have remembered wrong. Maybe I thought I told her." The sentence didn't hold. It wasn't strong enough to keep his story standing. I looked at him for a moment, not to pressure him, but so he'd understand how clearly I could see him now. Not the man in front of me, the man from that group chat. No one in his family said another word. The air felt like it had been put on pause. And at the center of that pause was Colin, no longer the calm version he usually played. I was the one who turned away first, not because I was angry, but because I no longer had a reason to stay in a room where the truth had been replaced by a story that only served one person. I grabbed my coat and walked to the door. Behind me, a chair scraped hard against the floor. Colin rushed after me. "Moraine, wait." I stopped under the porch light, not turning back. He spoke quickly, low and urgent. "You doing that in front of everyone? They'll get the wrong idea." I turned to him. The porch light washed over his face, making it look faded, like a layer of color had been rinsed off. "No," I said. "They'll get the right idea. For the first time." Colin opened his mouth as if he had something to say, then closed it. There wasn't a sentence in the world strong enough to patch the gap he'd created. I looked at him again. A steady look, calm, without blame. Then I left him with one line, the one I knew would follow him for a long time. "You've told so many stories about me that don't include me." I didn't wait for a reaction. I stepped down the porch stairs and moved out of the light. Not running away, just putting enough distance between myself and the story he was trying to write. Behind me, I heard him call my name. Not loud, not soft, just enough for me to know he was finally feeling what I had seen for a long time. No one can hold up a mask forever without dropping it in front of someone who sees too clearly. That night, the wind was light. I walked without feeling heavy. There was only one feeling settling in me, quiet but sharp. The version of Colin everyone admired wasn't the Colin I lived with. And the truth, for the first time, had been placed on the table without me raising my voice, without me defending myself. I said one sentence, and it was enough. After that family gathering, the house felt quieter than usual. Colin avoided looking at me, but not in a guilty way. He looked like someone trying to patch a mask that had cracked in front of too many people. I let him handle it on his own. And I didn't say a single word about what happened at his mother's house. My silence made him even more uneasy. 2 days later, I found the thing he feared most, the entire secret group chat. Not because I searched, not because I hacked anything. He just forgot to lock his phone when he rushed into the bathroom, and the screen was open right on the thread his family had just sent. This time, it wasn't a small leak. It was the whole picture. In the family group, he talked about himself as if he were the only pillar keeping our home from collapsing. His sisters praised him for being kind, selfless, patient with his wife. His mother sent messages thanking him for his goodness. Not one sentence matched the life I was living with him. In the friends group, things went even further. Colin became a kind of everyday hero. The man who handled everything at home. The man who endured a difficult wife. The man who was always right. Always strong enough to be forgiving. The compliments went back and forth, light but sharp, shaving away at the real version of me. I read slowly, not letting emotion step in, just letting my eyes do the work of recording the truth. Then came the deepest cut. A message he sent to a friend. She's emotionally unstable, unpredictable. I have to stay calm all the time. Another one. I tried to help the neighbors, but she hates it. It's exhausting. I sat down by the table, eyes still on the screen. I remembered every single thing he was bragging about, because I was the one who did them. I helped the neighbors clear the street when it snowed. And I cleaned the house after every time he tore it apart during one of his fixing moods. I was the one who suggested visiting his mother, and he was the one who always said, maybe another day. He didn't just erase me from the story. He used the space left behind to light up his superhero version of himself. A version that never got tired, never did wrong, never fell short. In that moment, I understood Colin's psychology so clearly, I didn't need to ask another question. He needed to be admired. And the easiest way to be admired was to invent a wife worse than the real one. I locked the screen and set his phone back exactly where he'd left it. I didn't feel shaky. I didn't feel like screaming at him. I just felt like I was standing in a room where the curtains had finally been pulled open, the light coming in, leaving nothing to hide. When Colin stepped out of the bathroom, he saw me sitting at the table, my expression calm enough to make him stop in his tracks. He looked at his phone, then at me. He asked, his voice a little tight, "What are you doing?" "I'm looking at what you've been saying about me," I said. My voice was soft, just a statement. No accusation, no anger. Colin stiffened. He moved closer, placing his hand over the phone as if to cover it. "You misunderstood. It's just a way of joking." "Joking with who?" I asked. He opened his mouth, but no answer came out. There wasn't a single sentence he could use to justify the things he called jokes, things he'd repeated for months, across multiple groups, all aimed at building the version of himself he wanted people to praise. I looked straight at him. "The problem isn't that you lied to me," I said. "The problem is you erased me from your life and replaced me with the version that fits the story you want to tell." Colin flinched, like someone had touched the most sensitive nerve in his body. He didn't get angry. He just collapsed inward a little. Not because I was condemning him, but because I had finally seen the thing he'd been hiding all along, the truth of who he was when no one was watching. He sat down, head lowered, as if he wanted to make himself smaller. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said, his voice thin. "I'm not hurt," I replied. "I just see things clearly." That sentence made him struggle for breath more than any accusation ever could. I stood up and walked to the bedroom. I took out a suitcase, opened it, and began folding my clothes. Not hurried. Not a decision made in anger. Each motion was slow and neat, like I was packing away an old role I no longer wanted to wear. Colin rushed to the doorway, panic in his voice. "Where are you going? You can't just leave me like this." I didn't look at him. I folded the last shirt, set it in the suitcase, and pulled the zipper closed. "I'm not leaving anyone," I said. "I'm just stepping out of the story you wrote about me." Colin shook his head, unable to accept it. "Don't do this. They'll think correctly," I cut in. For the first time, I stood up, my hand on the suitcase. I didn't drag it out the door. I didn't declare I was leaving the house that moment. I just created a new distance, one that made it clear I was done playing the bad wife role he invented to make his perfect image shine. And Colin stared at me for a long time, as if trying to reassemble the pieces I had just knocked loose. But none of the pieces fit anymore. Not because I broke them, but because they were never real. I turned away and left the suitcase by the door. Anyone looking at it would understand it was a silent warning. A warning that didn't need raised voices, didn't need tears, didn't need anger. It only needed the truth. The next morning, the house was so quiet I could hear my sleeve brush against the suitcase as I pulled it toward the door. I didn't pack everything. I only took what belonged to me. The rest, the things we'd chosen together, I left behind. Not because I wanted to keep them there, but because I didn't want to carry any piece of a life where I'd stood in the wrong place for too long. Colin stood in the bedroom doorway, and his hair still messy from a sleepless night. He watched me without saying a word. The way he looked reminded me of someone trying to guess how far things had gone, but too afraid to ask because he knew he wouldn't like the answer. I rolled the suitcase through the living room. No scene, no raised voice, no handwritten note, no long message. I didn't want to explain anything to his family. I didn't want to give a speech about what he had done. No one needed me to tell the story because the truth had been speaking for me for a long time. They just hadn't been paying attention. I knew one thing clearly. If I stayed quiet and walked away, they would put the pieces together on their own. They would remember every moment they brushed off as a misunderstanding. They would start asking the right questions. And Colin, someone who'd grown used to standing at the center of every compliment, would finally feel how big the space becomes when the truth takes up all the room. I placed my hand on the doorknob. Behind me, Colin stepped closer. "Moraine, you're not going to say anything?" His voice shook like someone who just lost something he never believed he could lose. I turned around. The morning light fell across his face, revealing the tired lines he used to hide so well. There was no anger in me, no hurt, just clarity. "No need," I said. "You have an entire life ahead of you to explain yourself to everyone else." The words didn't cut in a sharp way. They were simply true. True enough that he couldn't find a single place to push back. He didn't know whether to step closer or move away. In that moment, I saw something in him I'd never seen before. The emptiness of a man who no longer has praise to cling to. The loss of control when the story he built can't hold itself up anymore because no one is helping him maintain it. This wasn't a moment of revenge. It was the moment power returned to where it belonged, to me. I was no longer a side character in the story he told other people. No longer the backdrop that made Superman Colin shine through carefully crafted lies. I was just myself, and my leaving took away the one piece his story depended on, the piece he kept twisting so he could stand taller. He called my name one more time. "Moraine, I can fix this." I looked at him long enough for him to understand what I didn't need to say out loud. The truth can't be fixed with an apology, and whatever he needed to fix, and he would have to do it alone, because the double life he built was made with his own hands. I opened the door. Cold air rushed into the house, light but strong enough to pull up everything I'd pushed down for months. A kind of lightness you feel when you step out of a room with stale air. I pulled my suitcase down the steps. No turning back, no waiting for him to follow, no pausing to hear whatever he wanted to say. My revenge arc wasn't about hurting him. It wasn't about humiliating him. It wasn't about exposing him to his family or his friends. My revenge arc was that I stopped acting in the script he wrote. The moment I left, his story stopped making sense. All the things he'd said about a difficult, unpredictable, emotionally unstable wife no longer had a foundation to stand on, and the praise he'd been collecting no longer had the context to survive. He didn't lose me. He lost the thing he was more addicted to than the truth, admiration. And that was the quietest, cleanest, coldest revenge I could give him. I moved into a small apartment on the edge of the city. Not big, but enough for me to see clearly how I was living. On the first morning waking up there, without the familiar sounds of Colin in the hallway, the only thing I felt was that the air was lighter. Not empty, just right. I slowly picked up the habits I left behind. I cooked the way I liked. I visited friends without reporting to anyone. I set my phone anywhere I wanted without checking whether it was face up or face down. Small things, barely noticeable to others, but to me, that they were signs that I'd stepped out of a life that revolved around someone else. One evening, I sat by the window and watched the cars move down the street. I waited for anger to show up, but it didn't. What came instead was clarity. Some relationships don't end with a fight. They end when you finally see how long you've been standing in the wrong place. If anyone asked what I think of Colin now, I could only answer simply, I didn't try to hurt him. I just chose a life where I get to be myself. Sometimes, that alone is enough to let everything return to its true shape. Some relationships don't need noise to end. They just need one clear moment for you to see how small you've been inside them. And sometimes, the strongest choice is to walk toward a life where you're no longer confined to someone else's story. That's where this story ends. Thank you for staying with it until the last line.